Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burek of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest, but I found him on Frank Curzio's podcast, and I started following his research work. He's actually a very interesting person in terms of how much he studies the technology markets, and I'm finally happy to get a technology analyst on here. We've been wanting one for a very long time. He's a former Morgan Stanley investment consultant. Louis Basenese has helped direct over $1 billion in institutional capital before leaving and co-founding Wall Street Daily, which quickly became one of the web's largest financial publishers with a daily circulation of more than 700,000 readers. In 2014, he founded Disruptive Technology Research to pursue his investing passion and fill the void in the market for high-quality, 100% independent research on disruptive tech. Louis's expertise has earned him regular appearances on CNBC's Closing Bell, as well as other media mentions, including Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Morningstar, MarketWatch, Street.com, and MSN Money. He holds an MBA from Crummer Graduate School of Business at Rollins College. Thank you for joining me, Louis Basenese.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate the opportunity.
And hopefully I nailed the pronunciation there since I just asked you for it.
Oh, hey, it's close enough.
Well, if we were in Italy, like you said, it would be Basenese, but...
It'd be perfect. You'd have it spot on.
Well, Louis, I want to ask you about 3D printing. It seems the sentiment in the sector has hated, yet when I look at the current events, the news stories, it seems, these bridge, I don't know if you saw the latest one, there's this bridge in Europe where it's going to be constructed with this fully automated or fairly automated robot, and it's going to be 3D printing metal, and there's all these cool news stories about 3D printing, but yet the sector just seems to be have turned out of favor. Is that because 3D Systems, Triple D, the revenue growth has slowed and it's not profitable right now?
I think there's more at work, and this is just really how technologies get absorbed and penetrate the markets. I mean, 3D Systems is a company that I started following actually back in 2010 when you had almost nobody talking about it. And the reason I tuned into it was because I saw a huge spike in patent filings for 3D printing technologies. And really what's happened, you've seen since 2010, you had a huge run-up as just the public became aware of all these really cool stories, like you mentioned, about what's capable with 3D printing. However, what tends to happen with these new technologies is the hype, the expectations get way ahead of reality, and I think we're in that day of reckoning right now for these 3D printing stocks. So you've seen them have really nice run-ups, 2011, 12, 13, and then they've all kind of gotten into some tough sledding, and 3D Systems is leading the way. I mean, it's kind of the bellwether along with Stratasys in that sector. So is the potential for 3D printing still just as promising as it was? Absolutely. But what I think you're seeing is that investors are demanding that the fundamentals of the businesses, the sales and profits, catch up with what's possible.
That's interesting because other technology sectors don't seem to be discriminated as much, but maybe that's because most of the 3D printers, they're actually making stuff. They're not doing software as a service. They're not doing cloud-based computing or things like that. They're actually making things. But in terms of the 3D printing sector, do you expect then a consolidation where 3D Systems then is going to buy some of these smaller companies like Organovo or Stratasys, or we're going to see some of these larger manufacturing companies that maybe they've been debating doing some of their own 3D printing like HP or General Electric? Are they going to come in then and buy bargains because the sentiment has dropped so much?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely going to see more consolidation. I mean, when Stratasys was making its runs, it merged with a company that I was waiting to go public. It was an Israeli-based company, Objet. And you've seen a lot of consolidation in the space already. 3D Systems has been a huge consolidator, just smaller companies rolling them in. And I think that's just inevitable. It's going to continue while you've got a lot of new innovative players coming into the space, targeting different niches. It makes a natural environment for these bigger companies to kind of roll them all up and expand their potential. But I think you hit on something really key, too. I would not be surprised if you saw a GE or an HP start coming into this space and looking to really just supercharge growth in their overall business by buying one of these larger 3D printing companies.
Yeah, because I know they've been doing research and development in their own segments for 3D printing, but they have access to much cheaper capital, it would just pay for them, since they have access to such cheaper capital, just to go in there and buy the business now when debt and capital is this cheap for a larger company.
Absolutely. I think the other thing to consider too, for them, they have ways to start putting 3D printing into the markets, right? They have applications where they could, if they own the 3D printing technologies, that they could look to cross-sell it across their other divisions. And I think that's really the one thing that's plagued 3D printing stocks is the market penetration. Everyone thought you were going to have a 3D printer in your house just like you had a personal, just a regular LaserJet or a laptop. And the truth is, not everybody needs a 3D printer. So you just haven't seen that mainstream adoption take off yet. So I think you need some bigger companies with a lot further reach pushing the technology into the markets, as opposed to just consumers pulling it into the market because they just want it, like we see with so many other like you mentioned, software as a service type businesses or just software applications.
Yeah, and the cost, to add to your point there, the cost of the 3D printers, I know I've seen these on AngelList and Kickstarter. They want to bring a more affordable 3D printer to the marketplace, but these are small batches of them. This is not large-scale, massive amounts of 3D printers where almost everyone can go buy one for $100 that cranks out quality tools that they can use to repair cars and things like that. We're not there yet. Maybe in 7 years or 10 years or something along those lines, we're going to get there, but we're not there yet. I think most of the 3D printers that are available for people to buy are at least a couple $100, if not over $1,000, right?
Yeah, and we've come a long way. I mean, if you go back 10 years, I think the first patent on 3D printing was filed back in the late 80s, early 90s. And if you go back then, through the 90s, most 3D printers cost upwards of 50 to 100 grand, and they were used really in specialized high-tech industries like aerospace and in the automotive markets. But we've seen those prices just plummet, which is a good thing. But I still think, like you said, they have to come a lot further down. And then the other thing that I think is really key is the materials, right? So for a really long time, the most materials that you could print with 3D printing have been types of plastics. And now we're just starting to get into metals and a lot more, I guess the word would be diverse range of materials that you can use, which obviously opens up the use cases for this. And I think that's the key. So, I would say there's going to be a day where a 3D printer is really affordable and it's a commodity, and that really the profit potential is going to be in the material science. Companies that are making unique combinations of metals and ways to print in materials that we haven't been able to do before.
Yeah, and eventually the plan is to print food. I know NASA's testing that right now, so space journeys, they don't need to bring quite as much supplies with them. But it's really cool to think about the future here, because in Star Trek, they had the replicator machine, right? And pretty much anything you could think of, the replicator machine produced it, whether it was a food dish or something like that, very quickly. So we're not quite there yet, but maybe in a decade or so we're going to have something similar to that, at least like maybe for some tools around the house or utensils or car repair stuff.
It's an exciting future to think about with 3D printing for sure. So yeah, I'm with you.
Now, changing topics here, Louis, to robotics. We've had a lot of Silicon Valley people come out, and there's differing opinions about robotics. I'm actually reading Rise of the Robots now, which kind of paints a negative dystopian future about how low unskilled labor could lose a lot of jobs to robots, and also highly skilled labor, whether it's doctors and surgeons, with the intuitive surgical, could lose it. What's your opinion on what's going on with the robotics industry? Are we about to enter the golden age of robotics?
I don't know if I'd call it the golden age just yet, but I think people are mistaken if they think it's a long way off. I mean, even you and I should be worried that there's a lot of news articles, financial news articles right now that are written by robots. The AP uses them, Zacks Research uses them to do earnings reports. So just quick synopsis of what companies are reporting. So absolutely, I think we're at a tipping point for adoption. And quite to be frank about it, in some countries the demographics necessitate it. I mean, if you look at countries like Japan, where you have an aging population, if you don't start replacing some of these lower skilled jobs or service oriented jobs with robots, there's not going to be any humans to fill those jobs. So I think it's a real market dynamic that is shaping adoption. But I also think this is one of those things where we see the capabilities of robotics and automation increasing at such a rapid pace that they're able to do jobs that 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we just thought weren't possible. I mean, if you go on the web, there's so many examples. You mentioned Intuitive Surgical. There's a great YouTube video of one of their latest surgery systems actually suturing up a grape, the skin back on a grape. And I mean, I think, think about the dexterity that needs to be involved to make that happen, and the reliability of that a human hand might not have in terms of the steadiness. So there's countless examples of those. I've seen ones where there's very small robots that are able to lift or pull or carry, over 100 times their weight in an object. So there's a lot of applications for it. I do think you're going to start seeing it get pushed out into industries that people thought were particularly safe beforehand that really aren't going to be anymore.
Is robotics an investable trend yet, or is it more where it's private companies now, or these larger companies like ABB or Google, where they're a smaller portion of the revenues, they're investing heavily in research and development, and it's not a major portion of their revenue set? Is there interesting pure play opportunities for investors out there who are looking at good robotics companies?
There are some pure plays out there. iRobot's one. They make the kind of what they're known for is the Roomba, the home robot, the vacuuming robot. Me personally, when I look at this space, I think it's super compelling, a lot of growth potential. There are a lot of promising startups that are out there that are still privately held, but trying this early on to try and pick a pure play that's going to emerge as a dominant player is really a crapshoot, if we're honest about it. So the way I look at this is it's a trend that you absolutely want to be investing in, but you have to do it in a diversified way. And the best way I've found to do it is the Robo, R-O-B-O ETF. It tracks an index of companies involved with robotics and automation that derive a meaningful portion of their revenues from those industries. So it's weighted in such a way where there's, I believe, right off the top of my head, there's 20 bellwether companies in there that comprise about 2% each in position size, and then there's some smaller, more innovative, up-and-coming pure plays that have smaller weightings in that. But for the everyday investor, the mainstream investor, this is the best way to be levered and have exposure to this trend without having to try and dig around and find that tiny, small or microcap company that's got a really innovative robotic solution that's going to dominate the market. I think that's a much tougher task, and one that I don't think you need to do at this point.
Yeah, that's a good idea for diversification purposes. Excuse me. I think going forward with artificially cheap capital, whether that's cheap debt and the central bankers intervening in interest rates, that combined with politicians in different states, cities and states in the United States trying to force minimum wage laws higher. And I don't really want to get into the social debate of whether that's right or not, but the companies, with the cheap capital available, we're seeing clear evidence, right, that McDonald's and so many other of these companies are starting to look at replacing their human workers because their wages are rising with workers with touchscreens, with either robots or touchscreens. I think even hamburger flipping robots are now being tested at least.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Chili's a couple weeks ago with the family, and you can order straight from a touchscreen. I mean, you're eliminating a job that I held, through college, serving, waitering tables and stuff. But, you hit on a good point, too. Think about if you're thinking like a business owner and you're dealing with rising costs, this isn't just a cost play, though, right? This is a reliability. A robot doesn't need bathroom breaks, doesn't need a regular shift. They can work nonstop. So from that standpoint, you don't have workers' compensation insurance that you have to worry about. There's so many other affiliated costs that are associated with having a human workforce that don't come into play necessarily with robots. I mean, you can take, Amazon is using a lot of robots to pick packages from their distribution centers. You're seeing it in other industries where they're replacing 20 workers with robots and having one human worker that kind of supervises the robots, make sure nothing's going wrong. And I think that's only going to increase over time.
Yeah, I think our listeners out there, they're going to have to research the robotics industry, and they're going to have to find going forward if either if they don't own their own business, if they're an employee, they're going to have to find an industry and they want a career where robots aren't going to take their jobs, or they're going to have to, if they're a doctor or surgeon, they're going to have to learn to adapt to those new types of tools with the joysticks and the HD webcams, whether it's Intuitive Surgical or Transentrix, which is a smaller company. They're going to have to learn to adapt much quicker. It seems like everything is just accelerating faster, Louis, in terms of the technology that's being implemented in so many industries.
I'd agree with that. I mean, everyone talks about, have we hit our limit with Moore's Law? Are we going to see that happening? I just see technology innovation accelerating across the spectrum. You're seeing things that weren't possible 3 and 5 years ago possible today because you have multiple technologies that are advancing at such a rapid pace that it makes things much easier to facilitate. I mean, one of the areas I've seen this is in wireless charging. This whole idea, which has been around for a century from Nikola Tesla about being able to distribute power over the air, really wasn't feasible until the last couple of years because of advancements in chip technology, in material sciences and antenna technology. But now we're seeing that this is not only very feasible, it's going to be commercially available, I would bet, within the next 1 to 2 years.
Isn't it already available? Isn't Samsung running commercials now for the new Galaxy S6 that's wireless charging, or is that plugged in and then wireless?
Yeah, no, so that chip is made by IDTI, a publicly traded company, and that uses magnetic resonance technology. So if we think about wireless charging, I think there's a big misconception out there. People think it's available, and there's a type of wireless charging where you don't need the cord, but the device still has to be in contact with a mat or very close to the mat within 11 centimeters. But what I'm talking about is true wireless charging, where you can get at a distance of 15 to 30 feet away from the actual charging device, and you'll be receiving a charge. So there's multiple companies that are moving towards commercializing that right now. But yeah, you're right. If you go into some Starbucks now, Plug Power, I'm not Plug Power, that's a battery play, but there is the power mat. You can put this little dongle on your phone and rest it on what looks like a hockey puck that's embedded in the countertops, and your phone will start getting a charge. But that's really not. That's a very active charging process. What people really want. I mean, I'm a consumer, and maybe you'd probably agree too. I'd love to be able to walk into a Starbucks or through the airport and just be getting a charge as I'm walking and even using my phone without having to worry about finding an outlet or somewhere to lay down the phone to get a charge.
That would be super efficient. Yeah, that would be exactly like you mentioned Nikola Tesla. I don't know if you've seen other Nikola Tesla documentaries, but that's almost like him proving that he can move electricity basically wherever he wants wirelessly over long distances through the ionosphere back in the day.
Yeah, and the limiting factor there and this is, MIT and Witricity is a specific private company that's worked on higher power applications, and it's limited by the size. Basically, you send, there's these coils, and you pair up the coils, and you're using magnetic resonance to generate an electric field and transfer the electricity. But when you talk about mobile devices, you're limited by size, right? You can't have a very big coil to go long distances because the phones aren't that big, or the iPads aren't that big.
Switching gears here, I want to ask you about virtual reality. Oculus Rift just announced that the first unit's going to ship with the Xbox One, I guess. Do you think this is going to be a very big trend where a lot of video gamers are going to all start buying virtual reality headsets, and this is going to lead to disruption in many other industries as well, maybe with doctors practicing surgery or other professions, practicing their craft before they actually do it in virtual reality?
I absolutely think it's I'll have to disclaim this in saying at first I didn't think this was going to be a big deal, but increasingly I am convinced, I'm in the camp that this is virtual reality, augmented reality is going to be a really big deal. One of the obvious signs to me in terms of what the market interest was, is if you compared Oculus Rift's display at the Consumer Electronics Show over the last 2 years, before they were acquired by Facebook, they basically had a card table and a sign up that said, "Hey, we're Oculus Rift." I'm not kidding. And then if you look at the very next year after the acquisition, they had one of the largest displays and interactive exhibits at CES, and it was just jam-packed, showing the demand. And I think it's definitely going to go beyond gaming. Peter Diamandis is a big guy in disruption, writes about it all the time, and he argues that things like real estate agents should worry about it, because instead of going to visit a property, people could sit at home and visit it virtually. I don't think it's going to get that far in that industry, but that gives you an idea of how much virtual reality could truly disrupt. I mean, you mentioned different ways to train, whether it's surgeons, pilots. I mean, there's so many applications where if you can have a screen that mimics reality and puts people in situations that they can manipulate the environment, I think there's endless possibilities for that type of technology. But again, it's the same problem, right? It's how do you pick the winner now? I mean, if you want the clear market leader is Oculus Rift, so you got to own Facebook. Or you got to look for pick and shovel plays, companies that make the connecting cables or different chips that are used in virtual reality headsets. So it's from, it's that whole difficulty of finding really new cutting edge technologies is then finding the best way to invest in them so that you can profit from it.
Yeah, the first company, often the pioneer, it tends to be the one that gets filled with arrows, and then the other companies that come in later. I think Steve Jobs learned this the best when Apple entered other markets later, after he learned the mistakes from the earlier MP3 players and the earlier smartphone companies. So the first guys into the market, normally the pioneers, you think they're doing a good job, but they don't make the majority of the profits in the industry. They tend to be the ones that make the most mistakes and get shot full of arrows.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
The next topic I have is cybersecurity. It seems like every day now, Louis, we see stories, major security breaches that are coming on, whether it's the Federal Reserve that was hacked or the IRS. There was a massive data breach. And the latest one, I think, in the last week was the federal government had all their employees' data hacked, and they didn't even know about it for a year. It seems to me, with all these news stories coming about and corporate espionage, there was I don't know if you saw this, but there was the St. Louis Cardinals hacked the Houston Astros, and now the FBI's investigating. Governments hack other governments. It's just crazy. It seems like this area is drastically underinvested in by so many companies in terms of protecting their data.
I agree. I think bad news is great news. Bad news in the cybersecurity world is great news for cybersecurity companies. We've seen it play out. We've seen it play out, like you mentioned, with all these recent cyber attacks. There's only one ETF for investing. I mean, there's a lot of volatile, high-flying cybersecurity individual stocks like FireEye and Palo Alto, ArcSight. But if you want to get an overhead view of what the whole industry is doing, the HACK, HACK ETF tracks 31 different cybersecurity companies, and every single time news breaks of another data breach or another attack, you see that ETF's price break out to new all-time highs. It's only been around since late last year, but even this week, on the heels of that you mentioned, the Office of Personnel Management breach, which was originally only, they thought, 4 million personal records, and now they think it could be upwards of 14 million. The ETF today actually almost hit an all-time high at $33 per share. So this is a dramatically underinvested area for companies and investors as well. You're seeing hedge funds start piling into the sector, much heavier weighting to these cybersecurity names than they've previously had. And I think also the thing to keep in mind, cybersecurity is reactive, not proactive. The criminals always tend to be a couple steps ahead of the best defenses. So this is a situation where spending is going to need to increase on cybersecurity, and I don't foresee it ending anytime soon.
Yeah, I completely agree that the criminals are always ahead. I actually just watched this movie called Black Hat with Chris Hemsworth. It's actually a very good movie about that. But there's a lot of other hacking movies and TV shows and things like that. But there's just so much incentive for whether it's trying to manipulate a stock market or corporate espionage or one government trying to steal another government's data or stuff like that. That they're going to be playing defense, like you said, for a long time, and the budget's going to have to keep going up. I've tried to research the market and see a way where they could reduce the budget, but it's not. It's going to be a never-ending fight, basically, to protect the data.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one stat I saw recently was about a decade ago, the U.S. government spent $1 billion on cybersecurity. In the last year, they've spent $15 billion, and that trajectory is only going to continue. So it's a prime time to be a cybersecurity company, and for investors, I think everyday investors, if they've looked or invested in some of these individual names, they know how volatile it can be. But again, that's why I think a prudent way to go about it is using the HACK ETF and just having some exposure to it in your portfolio.
Now, this is a follow-up to the cybersecurity. Do you think biometrics are going to help with cybersecurity, or what about the blockchain technology with Bitcoin? I had a Bitcoin entrepreneur on recently, Eric Voorhees, and he said the the blockchain technology, the way the Bitcoin code is designed, you don't have to, if you buy with Bitcoin online, you don't have to enter all your personal information on a website. It doesn't store all your data, your credit card number, your home address, a lot of that info. So do you think those two solutions could potentially help solve some of the cybersecurity issues?
I do. I've been a pretty negative on Bitcoin in general from the form of an alternative currency, but I think the technology, the blockchain behind it has a lot of applications, and security is definitely one of them. I also think biometrics. Biometrics has proven to be the key enabler for mobile payments, right? So you had Google Wallet come out before you had any biometric authentication, but people were really reluctant to give up their personal financial information without security being guaranteed. Google Wallet got hacked, I think, in the first couple of weeks of being live, and then you've seen biometrics really fill that gap there. Apple obviously made that acquisition of Authentic, which is a company that I followed leading up to that acquisition, and you're seeing it become much more mainstream. I think one of the latest Samsung devices actually has iris recognition, so you can have multiple biometrics to provide additional security, so voice, fingerprint, iris recognition. You can actually even scan the veins in your palm. I do think that's going to become an integral part of security nowadays, and there's ways to do the biometrics where you don't exchange information, where you can keep all the personal information isn't stored in the cloud. It can be kept on the device. Or separately can be in another secure space so that you can match them anonymously and confirm identity. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Bitcoin, in an ironic twist, could come into play in terms of keeping things more secure.
Yeah, and I think biometrics there, I think it's a lot better alternative than remembering a password. You can forget your password. Not everyone remembers to store the password. People often use too simple password, or they use the same password for everything. I don't know if you caught this, but I remember Edward Snowden saying that because of the supercomputers and other stuff, most people should switch to passphrases. But if we go to biometrics, it's just going to be easier. People aren't going to have to remember all these dozens of passwords on different websites, or they're not going to have to remember to store all their passwords in a secure area then.
Yeah, and the people that are against it say, well, then people just end up getting their fingers cut off because someone will try and steal their identity. Which there have been some random cases of that, but again, I think that's more fear than reality. And if you use multiple
it's a movie, yeah.
Yeah, if you use multiple biometrics, you don't have to worry about that. You make it much more harder. Interestingly enough, I've spoken with a few private companies that actually have technology to do contextual biometrics. For instance, where if you sent a secure email that required an iris recognition to open it up for me, I would have to be close enough to my screen for that email to remain open. So, say it came in, verified my identity, opened the email, but then I walked away from my computer, that email message would then close down. So I think that's a unique marriage of both context and then the individual unique biometric as well.
Switching gears again, next topic. Since I have so many technology topics and I actually have someone who actually knows a lot about technology on, I want to ask you about driverless cars. We've heard the news stories say that, Google's only had, I think, 5 accidents, and all of them have been created by the driver following the car. They've all hit the car. But we've also seen, I think, the Volvo, that they were working on a automated car, and it hit people because it didn't have the right sensors. What's your opinion on how soon this technology is going to be adopted by, say, taxis or some of these large big rig trucks?
Yeah, I wish it was in time for my daughter before she started driving, but she's 10 now. I don't think that's going to happen in the next 5 to 6 years. I think you're going to see progression towards it. So you see a lot of self-driving capabilities, these lane departure warnings and automatic braking systems. And I think the National Transportation Security Board just came out and said, hey, we want some of these features as standard. So you're going to see that happen, and that's going to help the push towards driverless cars. But the day where you can just jump in your car and not actually even have a steering wheel and just kind of push a button where you want to go, I think is probably another 10 years plus out. But all the major automakers are making a push here right now. You're seeing the company that I recommend is Mobileye. So they make the chips and the cameras that really enable the data collection of the surroundings to enable a lot of these technologies. And they're booking engagements with automakers for models that are coming out in 2017, 2018. So all the major auto companies are moving in that direction. But is there a day where it's the Jetsons where you just jump in and go to your destination? I think that's still a little ways off.
Yeah, the flying cars are still being tested too. I don't think they're street ready yet. I don't think we're ready to take off straight in the air and then land right on the freeway without a major accident.
Hey, we might as well dream and enjoy what it might look like. But yeah, I think reality is you're going to see. But it raises a lot of other questions too. Like, what happens to the insurance industry if we go to a completely driverless automobile industry? Is there any more liability? I don't know. You talk about taxis. I mean, that's another disruption of jobs. Uber's already disrupting that, but is there another one on the horizon? I think there's a lot of these considerations that come along with going driverless that I don't know that everyone's thought through yet.
Yeah, and Peter Thiel actually brought that up. He said that he actually thinks innovation is slowing down, which I don't know if I fully agree with him, but there is a lot of marginal, I guess, innovation in Silicon Valley, whether it's, one app a little bit better or 10% productivity gains from one thing to another, but there's a lot of disruptive stuff that I see coming down the pipe. I'm not sure if Peter Thiel would agree with that, but I read his book and I've listened to his speeches, and he kind of hasn't been in that camp.
Yeah, and I get where he's coming from. He basically says ever since the hippies we haven't really innovated, and the reason for that is that he believes that it's mostly been incremental, software related, and that we've really ignored the heavy industries. And a lot of the newer opportunities I'm seeing are involved in what would traditionally be heavy industries where you're not really thinking about innovation, in particular the energy industry. So yeah, I think that I don't agree that innovation is decelerating. I think it's just moving in newer areas that have been overlooked for a while, and rightfully so. The focus is moving to those areas that are ripe for new innovations and disruption.
Now, in terms of the commercial drones in the United States, do you think there's going to be any viable business models, or are people just going to have their privacy taken away and be annoyed then with drones that are like flying pizzas over and dropping pizzas or things like that? Because we're seeing all these funny commercials. I think there's the anti-Amazon commercial I think everyone's seen now, where the people are like hiding in the office building away from the drones because they don't want to be bothered.
Yeah, no, look, I have not seen an economic case for drones that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's always been. I've followed the space for a long time with AeroVironment, AVAV, in the military space, and much like 3D printing, the prices of drones have dropped. I mean, just plummeted, which is encouraging all of these new, unique kind of ways to use them. But I mean, think about Amazon, right? Amazon is really pushing hard with the FAA to be able to get clearance to do deliveries with drones, but how affordable is that really? I haven't seen the economics yet. No one's really broken it out to say that getting that last 5 miles from the warehouse to your house is going to be cost effective, and I just don't see how it is. So yeah, I think it's a hot certain industries like real estate and different types of filming where you have to do filming or photography. I think it makes a natural fit for drones. But them buzzing around everywhere is really going to be an annoyance before it's anything else.
Have you seen anything? I know we've seen Samsung do a lot of research with graphene, and it's being tested in computer chips, in semiconductors, and solar panels and things like that in the lab. It's really an exciting material to me. Can we expect any commercial products then down the line in the next 7 to 10 years, or is it still really far away in your opinion?
I think, in the next 7 to 10 years, yeah, but in my mind, that's far away. You've seen a lot of press and a lot of newsletters pushing graphene as the next, wonder material, but to date, there's no one that's been able to commercialize anything that has been meaningful. So again, I mean, you can play the raw material, but other than that, I'm just not seeing any applications that are getting traction in the market, and a lot of it has to do with cost. That being said, there could be some developments along the way in the next 2 to 3 years that really change that dynamic. But right now, I am not following any graphene investments and really just kind of follow the material science from afar to see if anything comes on the scene, but nothing that's active right now.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing, and I thought Samsung had promised that we were going to see the graphene cell phone, that was bendable, or we could wrap it around our wrist, and
Right.
yeah, and it would have a hologram feature. I thought we were going to see that already, where it was a transparent screen and made out of graphene. I thought they were promising that in the next couple of years, but it just seems it's been delayed.
Yeah, and I think that'll be the case. Everyone has optimistic outlooks, and then you get down to the reality of bringing something to market, and it gets a lot harder.
Well, my final question for you before I let you go, although I could probably ask you a lot more technology questions, is what are some of your favorite disruptive technologies we'll see in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think wireless charging is one that I talked about earlier. I think that's absolutely going to be a reality where we're going to walk around and not have to worry about powering our devices like smartphones and tablets. I mean, I think it'll be as ubiquitous as Wi-Fi has become. I mean, if you remember back a decade ago, you had to figure out where you could get Wi-Fi, and now you can go anywhere and get internet coverage, from your local fast food restaurant to the public library to wherever you are, there's going to be Wi-Fi, and I think you're going to get wireless charging. That's that ubiquitous. The only way to play that right now from a publicly traded standpoint is a company called Energous. The ticker there is Watt, W-A-T-T. Full disclosure, I do personally own that, but it's based upon years of research and finding the companies that are closest to commercialization. So I think that's one that I think everyone will get. They'll understand it, right? Hey, getting a charge, I don't have to worry about, do I have my power cord with me so I can plug into some outlet somewhere? Another one that I think is going to be really disruptive, but under the radar, is in the energy space, like I was mentioning before, and the company there is ClearSign Combustion. The way to think about this is we know that the regulators are really cracking down on pollution, and the way to control ozone, there's really three components to ozone, and the one that we have the most control over is nitrous oxide. So in perfectly layman's terms, ClearSign's developed a way to reduce NOx, nitrous oxide emissions by upwards of 75 to 80%, and at the same time deliver an economic benefit for the companies that use it. So it's a more efficient way to do combustion that saves them both on fuel and other ways of controlling pollution. So those are the two that are at the top of my list that I own personally that I think are really going to change the dynamic in the mobile market, and then also in the emissions control, which gets into refiners and oil and gas exploration projects as well. So it's a really big market up for both of them, and these are small companies that have disruptive technologies and the patents behind them to protect it.
Yeah, I'm actually very optimistic and excited about so many different technologies and so many different industries with crowdfunding, so people can go on Kickstarter and AngelList if they have an idea. They wouldn't, in the past there was a lot of red tape. They would have to go to a banker in New York and they would have to beg them for money. But now if they have a pretty good idea, they can crowdfund it fairly easily or go to Silicon Valley. So I'm very optimistic on the technology side over the long term. There's bad ways to use technology, but I think it's just a tool. I think most people in the long term, the market will regulate whether or not the technology should be used for different things. But I'm really excited from a technology standpoint. I'm bullish on that. And I'm not so bullish on central bankers or politicians doing the right thing, but I am bullish on technology.
Yeah, no, same here. The government is our enemy, not our friend in most cases. So.
Well, in wrapping up the interview, Louis, I just want to thank you very much for your time. I really hope you can come back on in the near future again for another interview. In fact, maybe we could do this every couple months, an update in the technology markets. But please tell our listeners where they can find your work.
Yeah, no, hey, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'd love to come back on, and the best way to find me is at disruptivetechresearch.com. And then I also write periodically for Wall Street Daily, chief technology analyst over there. So you can either go to disruptivetechresearch.com or wallstreetdaily.com.